British Grand Prix definitely gave us a lot to talk about. So today we're going to discuss the British Grand Prix, what we learned, what we found out, and kind of try and unbox what the hell happened in that race and over the weekend. I think it's important to start with talking about superstar Nico Hülkenberg. I think it was an absolute shame that he didn't even manage to get into the race and didn't manage to get a few laps in or even start the race because of a power unit issue. An absolutely stellar job from him and the team to get him not only suited and booted, but get him in the car, get him to do some laps on the simulator. Remember, he hasn't been in the car since Abu Dhabi last year, so absolutely cracking job from Racing Point and Nico Hülkenberg there. A real shame that he didn't manage to get onto the track. I do believe Sergio Perez does have to quarantine for 10 days, which would mean we still get Nico again this weekend. Not anything to the detriment of Perez, but I would like to see Hülkenberg back in the car this weekend, just because I feel like he's got a great opportunity. It's a really strong car. It's a really good track for the car as well. And I'd like to see what he can do with something like that. It's kind of a good opportunity to kind of stake his claim, if you will. I'm not sure there's a way back into Formula One for him next year, with pretty much all of the seats gone. And if he did, it would be back in a midfield or low field team. So I'm not sure if that's something he'd even be interested in doing, but it would be good to see what he can do. So hopefully we do get him back this weekend. But in the same breath, I do hope Perez has a speedy recovery. We didn't want to see anybody get COVID in the paddock, especially not a driver. But also massive kudos to the FIA and everyone behind sorting out everything that needed to go on. I do understand there was whoever was in Perez's bubble also was then restricted and not allowed back into the paddock and had to isolate for the 10. I think it's a 10-day quarantine they're given. So I do believe they had to do that, but it seemed like a very speedy process, very well done, and they really did nail that and, you know, show that the show can go on. It's an absolute shame for Perez because he does lose 2 races and 2 opportunities of points, but it is good to see that we can still go racing even if unfortunately we do get more positives. Fingers crossed we don't. So let's talk about the race, and first off we must talk about Mercedes. Firstly, 8/10 up in qualifying. Okay, nobody's beating that. They're in a class of their own, unfortunately. Red Bull is strong, but not strong enough. It's an engine-heavy circuit. There's a lot of straights in it. There's a lot of times you need good engine power. That's where Red Bull are falling short. Ferrari are just somewhere. I don't really know what's going on with Ferrari. They're in a lot of trouble. They need to sort their stuff out quickly. It does seem to be the case that whatever secretly they were doing with the engines that they've now stopped doing because they've had to stop doing is having a detrimental effect on them. Because it's not just the Ferrari works team that's having problems. It's Haas and Alfa Romeo as well, which both run the Ferrari engines. So Ferrari powered cars really looking like they're struggling at the moment, which does indicate that Ferrari's biggest problem is their engine. I think they're now up to 3rd in the constructors. Because of the fluke podium for Charles Leclerc again, which if I was him I'd be super stoked with, because that car is really not a 3rd place finishing car, and that's the 2nd podium he's got this season that he's very much locked into, and I think he knows it. So car seems okay qualifying, but in the race it just drops like a rock. Vettel does seem to be struggling a lot more than Leclerc with the car. Not super surprising. It is likely that Ferrari are building and designing and shaping that car to be more favoured to Leclerc rather than Vettel, considering Leclerc is staying with the team next year and is kind of their money on guy, whereas Vettel they kicked out. They don't really want him in the team anymore. It's likely that Leclerc is having a lot of input in how the car's changed, how it's tweaked. If it is Vettel's last year in Formula One though, I would have liked to see him kind of come out of the gates, be a bit more gutsy, be a bit more ballsy, kind of, you know, give it a bit more oomph, show a bit more of that 4 championship winning style, rather than just kind of, it doesn't even seem to be making too much noise that the car isn't working for him. From what I can tell, please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Just like to see a little bit more from him. But you know, we will see as the season goes on. I gotta be honest, the race itself was pretty dull. When you have a team that's that dominant and that far ahead, it's just impossible for anybody to catch them. So I didn't watch it attentively, probably until like the last 3 laps when everything happened. Just because it was a bit of a snooze fest. No challenge to the Mercedes, no challenge between the Mercedes. Verstappen at the time, who was in third, had an empty track, no race for him. Leclerc, who was there in fourth, empty track, no race for him. There was a little bit of fighting going in the midfield, but the midfield was pretty much stabilizing because of DRS and tyre preserving and yada yada yada. So it wasn't the most interesting race until the last 3 laps, and I do think that's important to remember. Had the tyres not gone at the end, it really would have been a very dull, very easy lights to flag race for Mercedes. When you have to have incidents in a race to make it interesting, to me, that is not a strong formula. It's not a strong format for racing. So it's very important that moving forwards, I mean, I personally don't think next year's regulations are changing at all, if at all. And even the 2022 regs that were the 2021 regs but have now been pushed back, I don't think they're changing enough to see a massive shake-up in the order. So I am concerned that we'll still be in this state in a few years' time, which is not good for the sport and it's not good for Formula One. Because if the same person keeps winning all the time, people will turn off. You need a shake-up, you need competition, you need some racing. And I'm not blaming Mercedes, it's not their fault. They've made a very, very fantastic car and no one can compete with it. The other teams need to step up their game. But when the regulations don't change enough that advantage Mercedes had isn't going anywhere, it's very difficult to close up the gaps, as well as the fact that there isn't a lot of in-season testing, there isn't a lot of development time. So, you know, cars aren't changing very much throughout the season, which means pretty much the car you start with is pretty much the car you end with, because there isn't a great deal of scope. And that's what concerns me moving forwards to the 2022 regs, is that they're just restricting spend a little bit more, and they're restricting testing, and they're restricting a lot of things. And I am concerned that it'll get to a point where the car you start with is the car you end with, because you have no real chance to develop. Now, don't get me wrong, there is development on the cars. Some cars are getting faster, some cars are not really improving, some cars are trying things and they're not working, some cars are trying things and they are working. McLaren had the aero rigs on during free practice last weekend, so it's not that nothing is changing, it's just that development in season is slower because they don't have as much opportunity to run tests and things, and it's all very much done on computers and in the wind tunnel, and the only real time you get to see your efforts and the translation of what you've done is when it gets onto the car. And if in that process that something hasn't gone right or something's not quite right, you don't know that until it's actually on the car. So you could have spent 3 months developing something that gains you a 10th when you thought it was going to gain you half a second. It's just it's a difficult conversation as to whether they should bring back more in-season testing, and I kind of think they should, but I do believe that's a discussion for another time. So we'll put a pin in that and we'll push it off to the side. Tyre blowouts. I think it was odd for sure. I mean, we have seen the tyres blow out at Silverstone before. Remember back to 2013 when the entire last half of that race just got absolutely shaken up because everyone's tyres were going. So it's not unknown to see this happen at Silverstone. I think Pirelli predicted the hards would run 40 laps and the teams were pushing them 38, 39 laps anyway. So I don't know whether this was a Pirelli issue. For the fact that it only happened on 3 cars, I'm not sure it's a Pirelli issue. Maybe it was a few duds in the system. I'm not sure. It was the front left for all of them though. Front right, front left. I think it was the front left. So it's unknown to know whether it was a Pirelli fault or not. Obviously, I would be surprised if an investigation didn't go on behind closed doors with Pirelli, because they need to know if it was a Pirelli issue or not, or if the teams were just pushing those tyres a little bit too hard and that's why. But yeah, it's just insane that 3 cars had the tyre blowouts and 1 car managed to finish the race on 3 tyres. If anybody tries to tell me that that was not pure dumb luck for Hamilton, I completely disagree with you. It was the luckiest victory of his life. If that had happened half a lap earlier or a lap earlier, he would have had to pit, and because he couldn't have done 2 laps on the busted punctured tire. There's no way in hell he could have done that. He'd have been given the black and orange, and he'd have had to come in with that, I think, if he'd have tried to get to the end more than half a lap. He only had to do that for half a lap. Now, do not get me wrong, to not lose control of the car with 3 tyres is impressive. Do not get me wrong. But it was also damn lucky that it went when it did, and he was on the last lap and he only had half a lap to go. So a mixture of luck and good driving. Very, very unlucky for Sainz and Bottas, who were both in really strong positions. They weren't going to lose those positions. It was a good 5th, I think Sainz was, and then obviously 2nd for Bottas. They unfortunately had the tyres go the lap earlier, which meant they had no choice but to pit because they couldn't keep racing around on more than on 3 tyres. It's just not really normally possible to do. And like I say, if Hamilton had had another lap to go, he would have had to pit and probably would have lost the lead. The interesting one is obviously Red Bull. They took the risk on Verstappen to do the safety stop, which in turn lost them the chance to get the victory. Now the argument is, had they have not done that, Verstappen could have also suffered the same incident and could have had his tyre blowout as well. So it's a big toss-up, it's a big hit and miss to know whether they should or shouldn't have done that. If I'm Red Bull, I'd probably stand by what they did because they had the tyre info. 3 cars had just lost, or 2 cars at that point had just lost their tyres. They were on tyres that were as old as or nearly as old as, so they were obviously having issues and worrying about the tyres, and that just made sense for them to do the stop. It's definitely going to be interesting to see the tyres coming up this weekend for the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix, as Pirelli are stepping a grade softer on all of the tyre compounds. It's going to be a 2-stop at a push, more likely a 3-stop race. And I also think with a race that's very much going to be in Mercedes' hands with the pace, with everything, 3-stop race is going to mix it up a bit, hopefully. It's going to give more chances of an undercut, more chances for mistakes and things, more chances for different strategies, to run longer, to run shorter. Another good race for Williams. Obviously with the difficulties that Alpha and Haas are having, they are not really the bottom of the pecking order anymore, which is nice to see. It's good to see that team on the rise. They've done a lot of work, I think, over the winter, and it's just good to see the progressive steps they're making compared to last year. Obviously they're not where they want to be yet, but they are moving in the right direction as far as I can tell. Renault had a bit of a quiet one. They were good to get Ricciardo 4th. Ocon had a few good overtakes, but really the whole season for them so far has been quite quiet. They've not really done much. I think they're at a similar place to McLaren in terms of pace. So it's interesting when those teams get on track together. Like there was a long train. I think it was Sainz, Ricciardo, Norris for a while in the race, just showing that the cars are similarly paced, which does make sense because they're running the same engine. Does mean they've also kind of done similar things on the aero side of things. Now I think Renault's made a step up between Hungary and Silverstone because they do look to be a little bit more competitive, but it's very quiet for them at the moment. I'm not really sure if we'll see much of them. I think they're quite a way down in the constructors, so they're not really fighting with McLaren and Racing Point at the top of the constructors where I think they'd like to be. So they're not fighting for best of the rest or best of the midfield. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, obviously in losing Ricciardo at the end of the year and bringing Alonso in. It'll be interesting to see what they've said to him or what they've promised him to make him enticed to come back. Again, I mentioned this in the last video. I'm really not sure why Alonso decided to come back to Renault. It doesn't make much logical sense to me, but we'll see what they do with him next year. Obviously this weekend is the 70th anniversary of Formula One. As bad as it's been that we've had the pandemic, which has put a halt to proceedings in Formula One and all over the world and of all other sports as well. Here's the silver lining. If this hadn't have happened, the British Grand Prix would have been last weekend. We wouldn't have been able to have the 70th anniversary race at the circuit where it all came together. I almost wish they would be running the old circuit, so rather than doing farm through village and loop, just go straight across down through Luffield, so you cut out Wellington as well. That was the original circuit, or the most original that we can go back to in its current form. But obviously that section of the track has not been used for a while. It doesn't really have the runoff or anything. It's usually got a load of fan stands on it, merch stands and burger vans, so it's understandable why they haven't. But I kind of wish, in the situation we're in, the opportunity we have, and that bit of the track, is not being used for fans, I do kind of wish they'd have run it on the old circuit and really kind of done a good homage back. Other things to note that we've had announced since my last video: 3 more races on the calendar. Nürburgring, which let me tell you I am super stoked about, Portimao, which is a brand new circuit for Formula One in Portugal, and Imola returns to the F1 calendar as well. 3 very exciting circuits. Nürburgring, as I said, it's just a great circuit. It's been through a lot of financial issues, which is why we haven't had a race there for a while, so I'm super happy we're going back. I think the last race there was 2012. Been a long time since we've been there, which is a crying shame because it's a fantastic circuit. Portimao, I don't know anything about, and neither do the Formula One teams, which is absolutely fantastic. Formula One has never been there, so it's going to be a complete blank canvas for everybody. And obviously the return to Imola, which I think is great. 3 Italian Grand Prix in a season is going to make the Tifosi very happy. If only the Ferrari was good enough to be optimizing on that. Ha ha ha. Imola should be good. The interesting thing they're doing with Imola is they're making it a 2-day event. Now, I did tweet about this the other day, but I will go into a little bit of detail of this. I am not a fan of a 2-day Formula One event. And here is why. Firstly, it is very unlikely when fans can go back, when spectators can return to racing, that the ticket price will drop. In fact, it's more likely that the ticket price will increase because circuits have not had any attendance this year. The British Grand Prix barely makes a profit. Normally it makes enough to pay off everything and be even. I can't remember the financial terminology. I'm not a financial person, but it normally breaks even. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So it doesn't tend to make a profit. So without spectators, it likely hasn't even broken even for the race. And I'm sure F1 are doing what they can to subsidize the races that are going on because they are not getting the revenue in from the spectators. But because of this, it is likely that going to a Formula One race next year is going to be more expensive. If you reduce the Formula One events to a 2-day event rather than 3 and don't reduce that price, the fans and spectators are losing an entire day of track action, which is total rubbish in my opinion, and they're not paying any less for it. So it's less value for money, more expensive for less track action. I'm not a fan of that. Secondly, and it's something I touched on earlier and we'll probably touch on much more in a different video because now is not the time, but so many of the teams rely on the practice sessions for testing. A lot of the midfield teams, example, McLaren were running aero rigs at Silverstone, I think I said earlier. So the teams use those free practice sessions not only for the drivers to learn the track and learn the tyres, but to run new things they've developed on their cars. As I said, most of this stuff is developed through wind tunnel and CFD, which is computer designing. So the first time the teams get to try it is when they run it on the car. Now they don't want to run things on the car that are detrimental to the car, so they need to be able to test those things on the car before they run them on the car. Now, as far as my understanding is, there's no additional in-season testing coming as of 2021, 2022, whenever the new regs are coming, or if they're already, I don't know if there's going to be a change to the regs next year. But let's say for now, 2022, there's no additional in-season testing coming. In fact, from what I've heard, they want to reduce the amount of testing available. Pre-season testing's already gone down from 8 days to 6 this year. So they are reducing the amount of time that teams are having on track with their cars. I just don't think that's fair to the teams, especially when some teams are relying on those practice sessions to test out new things on their car. They need the time, they need the facility to be able to test, or if you don't want to do that, you're going to have to bring in season testing back. Because you can't just say to teams, we need you to develop the car to beat the teams that are too far ahead of you that have the advantage, but at the same time, you can't test on your car, you got to just put things on the car and hope they work. It's just not fair to the teams. So personally, I'm really not a fan of 2-day events. I understand why they're trying it out, but I really hope it's no good. I know that it's interesting when the teams don't have a lot of data and they've kind of just got to work with what they know, but I don't like it. I don't like the idea of a 2-day event. I'm sorry. I think there's too many cons and not enough pros to it. So I am against a 2-day event. But we will see how Imola goes, and I will be sure to let you know my thoughts and my reflections on it when it does. But for now, that is it. That is us summing up the British Grand Prix. I will hopefully be back next week to talk to you about the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix and my thoughts and reflections off of that. Hopefully it'll be more interesting for longer of the race rather than just the last 3 laps of the races we had last weekend. But for now, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been an absolute blast as always. If you enjoyed this video, go show that like button, some Formula One love. And if you want to support the channel, go hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss next time I upload a video. Stay awesome, and I will see you all in the next video. Do you like my new setup? Welcome to my chair.